This House is now in session. Good day, members. I'm happy to in our midst the presence of former Speaker of the House, Lindsey Bolden, who represented the constituency of St. Joseph from 1970 until 1986. He was Minister of Public Works as well as Speaker of this House. And we're happy to welcome also his guests who are here visiting for the first time.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm commanded to lay the proceeds of Crime Amendment Order 2019. Second.
Deputy Speaker, I am commanded to lay before Parliament the Immigration Automated Passport Control Kiosk Regulations 2019 and the Customs Amendment Regulations of 2019.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to give notice of a resolution to approve the proceeds of Crime Amendment Order 2019 made by the Attorney General under Section 65(1) of the Proceeds of Crime Act, Cap 1543, and that Her Excellency the Governor General be asked to assent and take the necessary steps to give effect to the resolution.
Private members' notices. Notices of questions, reports from select committees, first reading of bills, statements by ministers, congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, or replies to questions, motions, notice of motions for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, orders of the day.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of standing orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42, 5, 43, and 44 for the remainder of the day's sitting.
Beg to second.
Right. The question is that those standing orders so mentioned be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. Those honourable members in favour say aye. Those against say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Government business is now the order of the day.
Order number 7, sir. Order number 7, in the name of the Honourable Attorney General, to move the second reading of Companies Amendment Bill 2019.
Honourable member for St. Joseph.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the government business of today in relation to bills would be Order number 7 and Order number 8. Order number 8 is an amendment to the Charities Act, and with the leave of Your Honour, I would wish that it be a cognate debate, given that the two matters are very closely related.
Right. Those members in favour, please say aye. That this will be cognate debate. Those bills so mentioned by the member for St. Joseph. All members in favour say aye. Those against say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Propose to delay the chamber overly long today. But that will not in any way take away from the significance to how we do business in Barbados of the two short bills that we are looking at today. Order number 7, Mr. Speaker, is an amendment to the Companies Act, and order number 8 is an amendment to the Charities Act. And before I turn to the specifics of these amendments, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'd like to set a brief context. One of the challenges in our globalizing world is that there are supranational bodies which have been established with the consent of various countries, and those countries, sir, for the most part, do not include small countries in the Caribbean. And those bodies, the OECD, FATF, have taken unto themselves the role of being the international police and standard-setting body for the various areas of responsibility that they cover. Today's debate, sir, centers around the international setting standard parameters of the Financial Action Task Force. Mr. Speaker, the Financial Action Task Force is a supranational agency that is established for the purpose of eliminating money laundering and terrorism financing, largely given impetus after 9/11. Now, Mr. Speaker, I believe most Barbadians would say, well, what has that got to do with us? I don't think that anybody really considers that Barbados, with I think a total throughput of US dollars of less than $5 billion on an annual basis, could seriously be considered to be an agent or an agency through which any significant money laundering could be done. After all, it is a well-known statistic that the Barbados percentage of global trade is, I think, less than 0.0001%. Certainly, the movement of money through our financial institutions would not indicate that Barbados is in any way a major player in the area of money laundering. And if I were to even begin to suggest that we could approach being even a minor player in terms of terrorism financing, I think that such a statement would be greeted with peals of laughter. Nonetheless, sir, as a state that has always prided itself with operating at the highest possible prudential standard, and as a state that has proclaimed constantly since independence that we are prepared to be a major player in the global marketplace, it is incumbent on Barbados, no matter how inconvenient, to look to see how we can fit within the various modalities established by these international agencies. To be sure, sir, often what we are asked to do flies in the face of the concept of sovereignty. The supreme law of our land is the Constitution, and the supreme lawmaking body is this Parliament. And if, as a sovereign nation, we are not going to be permitted to set our own standards and to make our own laws, then we have to question rightly, what does sovereignty mean? But, sir, that is an argument which, while it will have its attractiveness, it must also take into account, sir, that from the days of the establishment of the League of Nations, from the days of the early treaties of Westphalia, for those of you who are studies of diplomacy and international law, you might be aware that they say that the treaties of Westphalia, which were treaties of Europe, which sought to create a framework for peacekeeping in Europe, as far back as the 1700s, sir. Goes that far back. We recognize that as a state, there is always going to be some agency or some arrangement by consensus which seeks to tell you how to behave. And that's all it is. Sorry to complicate the member for St. Peter's life so early on a Tuesday morning. But the point is, sir, the United Nations is an international body. It's a supranational body, perhaps the mother of all supranational bodies. And in many respects, that entity, being an entity made up really of states, is able to make determinations as to how states behave. We sign treaties every day which govern our relationships, and our law says that we honor our treaties. So by consensus, we agree to be bound by our treaty arrangements. We would all agree that we are bound by the decisions of the Caribbean Court of Justice. We would all agree that we are bound by the decisions of the heads of the CARICOM nations. And so, sir, the only difference between the FATF and the OECD and those bodies, and the bodies that we know so well, like the UN and others, is that we do not get a plate at the dinner table. We do not even get to sit at the dinner table. And that is the big challenge for the most part. That some of these agencies that attempt to dictate how we should operate as states, we don't get to effectively participate in the decision-making exercise. The FATF, however, is a little bit different. We all have a role to play in the Financial Action Task Force, unlike the OECD, when we are not even a member of the OECD, but the OECD determines how we should operate as far as our tax structures and our corporate structures. But at least in the FATF, sir, we, through the establishment of a regional institution called the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, we have an opportunity to participate. Now, how big an opportunity is it, sir? Well, small states like us, we attend, we participate, we bang on the table, we raise our voices, but often at the end of the day, the decision is made without regard to what our feelings are. But all of that, sir, is the context in which the Financial Action Task Force operates. As an international body, it sets the standards by which states must operate so as to effectively minimize, if not eliminate, money laundering and terrorism financing. Now, sir, Barbados in the year 2016 had an assessment done by the regional body. That assessment was called the Mutual Evaluation Exercise, to look at all of our anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing mechanisms as found within our laws. Barbados has well over 300 statutes. We have a large number of institutions. We have a large number of professions. We have banks, we have insurance companies, we have lawyers, we have real estate agents. And all of them, both collectively and individually, can be ripe for use by individuals who want to launder money for purely criminal endeavors, or who want to use those entities as a mechanism for funneling or channeling financing to terrorist organizations. Now, we are therefore obligated, as a result of that mutual evaluation exercise, to make certain changes to our law so as to conform to those standards. I have to tell you, sir, that when our mutual evaluation exercise was done, In 2016, and these exercises are done within the region in respect of every country, and it's done a peer review process, so our colleagues from Trinidad and Jamaica and wherever else will meet, examine our laws and say you need to change this in order to come into compliance. The FATF requires that we meet 40 standards, what are called 40 outcomes. And I regret to tell the Chamber, sir, that in 2016 Barbados performed abysmally. We performed abysmally in relation to those standards as set up by the FATF. And as a result of that poor performance, Barbados was put on what is called an enhanced, enhanced surveillance. And we are therefore, between that period and now, we are expected to meet certain standards so as to improve our rating. It's called the enhanced follow-up process. Now, our challenge, sir, and it is not dissimilar to the challenge that we faced in December when we had to amend the whole swath of legislation. I think it was 14 or 15 pieces in order to meet the OECD requirements. Our challenge, sir, is that very often the things that we are asked to change are things that have worked reasonably well for us in the past. So consider, for example, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the amendment to the Charities Act. For donkey years, and let me tell you how long ago these donkey years will take us. Everybody want to know how long the donkey years are. Our Charities Act, Mr. Speaker, was passed in 1979. There have been some amendments, but our Charities Act was passed in 1979. And the Charities Act has been a friend to many parliamentarians because many of us have established charities so as to be able to serve our constituents. And there's a good reason for that. There are some people who are prepared to donate to a registered charity, but they're not prepared, sir, to fund a particular parliamentarian because they don't want to be seen as being allied or owing any allegiance to any particular political party. So many politicians over the years have established charities. I certainly have had one for a few years, so as to be able to attract financial support, nothing substantial, but you know, if you're having a dinner and you approach somebody and say, I want you to buy some tickets from St. Joseph BLP, sometimes they're a little bit awkward. But if you say to them that we have a charity and these are the aims of the charity, then they would more willingly make a donation to that charity. But the method of registering our charities in Barbados as exists today, all that you have to do, Mr. Speaker, is sign a form which says, we, being trustees for, and you name the charity, hereby apply to be incorporated as a board under the provisions of the Charities Act. And then you say, we desire the name of the board to be, so you would say John Brown Charity. And you would say where the office is going to be, so you would say Suttle Street, Bridgetown. I don't mean to suggest that, remember, for the city. I had to pick an address. Black Bess St. Peter then. And then everybody, all the trustees sign it. You don't give the address of any trustee. You don't have to provide any information on who the trustees are, nothing. So it is a very simple form, but for its simplicity, sir, it has to be admitted that there's not enough factual material set forward which would allow for effective regulation. So even though we have operated in this way since 1979, so that is now what? That is now 40 years. The fact is that in an environment where you have to deal with money laundering commitments, where you have to deal with transparency issues, all those kinds of things, that form and that formula is really not adequate. In fact, I would venture to say that if we were going to pass a bill today, we would immediately reject that form providing minimal information to a regulator as being not in keeping with modern requirements of any regulator or administration. Easy to use, but impossible, sir, to regulate. Now, I suppose we never troubled ourselves to correct it. But so comprehensive is the peer review process, and so pervasive is the use abroad of charities for funneling monies to terrorism entities, that it was immediately spotted as an area where Barbados needed to tighten up. So now we will be required in the new form to set out information that is more useful to regulators and that would allow an agency that has to investigate what a charity is doing to be able to get information on the individuals. So you now have to provide, or you will now have to provide, the full names, addresses, and occupations and descriptions of the trustees. You will have to provide information on any properties that they own. You also will have to provide information on any applicant, trustee, or beneficiary who has held prominent public office, or who has held prominent public office in any international organization. Now, sir, I believe that any of the members of this chamber or the other place who had to open a bank account in recent times, and by recent I mean after the last election, will have discovered, if they hadn't discovered before, that they were now classed into a category of people called PEPs. Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, you know full well that a PEP is not any kind of political party. That's the PUP. A PEP is an acronym for politically exposed person. And, you know, people sometimes wonder why, I think we sometimes wonder why we get into political office. Because you fall under a microscope of the worst kind, sir. I remember having to do some special banking arrangements a few years ago, and it was taking long. And after about 3 months, I spoke to my account manager, and he said, well, Mr. Marshall, because you are a politically exposed person, we've had to go through special rules and regulations before we can extend these banking services to you. But I'm happy to say that you've passed the test. So I said, okay, well, I can get the money now? He said, no, sir, we now got to do that part. We've spent the last 3 months investigating you as a politically, well, testing you as a politically exposed person. And later today, and your children, I mean, I was embarrassed when they asked me to provide the maiden name of my paternal grandmother. Now, I still don't know why they asked me to do that, but they wanted the maiden name of my paternal grandmother. Happily, I was able to go and ask my father what his mother's maiden name was. And I was quite impressed when he knew. But this creature called a politically exposed person now comes under particular scrutiny because it is perceived that by being involved in some way in politics or by being connected in some way to a political environment, there's the substantial risk of corruption. And of course, the proceeds of corrupt activity being money, they need to make sure that that money does not find its way into the banking system. But they also need to make sure that that money does not find its way into the banking system by virtue of an individual setting up a charity and that charity opening a bank account. Now, Aldous Huxley wrote a book called Brave New World. Perhaps this is more a perilous new world than a brave new world, because the level of scrutiny that we must now subject ourselves to is far, far greater than ever before. But, Mr. Speaker, these are the realities. Because a charity, in law, is a particular animal whereby the people who fund the charity are seldom, if ever, identified. So that a person will have a charity and individuals put money into the charity, but no record is available to an administrator of who those individuals are. In fact, Mr. Speaker, it is well known that charities and trusts are established often for the purposes of creating a veil of anonymity. And that makes charities especially susceptible to be used by individuals who want to do money laundering or individuals who want to fund terrorist activity. That is the perilous new world that we live in. And so charities required special treatment in Barbados so as to bring our charities arrangement into line with a modern standard which allows an administrative body, a body that is responsible for regulating, to look at the individuals and, if necessary, carry out inquiries into them and into the source of their funds and so on. It is inconvenient, sir. I'm sure it will now cause individuals to be more careful, though, of how they establish their charity arrangements. And, Mr. Speaker, for the greater good, we are complying. I mentioned politically exposed persons a moment ago. The Charities Act is now being amended as well to define who these politically exposed persons are. Now, I will say, sir, that they don't use the term PEP, they don't use the term politically exposed persons, they use the term prominent public office. So that if you hold a prominent public office, then, sir, you are in for special consideration as you function under the Charities Act and also the Companies Act, because the amendment to the Companies Act that is being moved this morning also now for the first time defines a person holding prominent public office. And prominent public office, sir, includes, and we start at the top, the head of state. It includes any judicial office. It includes any permanent secretary, deputy permanent secretary, a head of a department, or a deputy head of a department. It includes a minister of government, a member of the House of Assembly, or a member of the Senate. It includes a chief executive officer, deputy chief executive officer, or a member of the board of a statutory board, a statutory corporation, or a state-owned enterprise. It also includes a senior military officer, a member of the executive of a political party, a chief executive officer, deputy chief executive officer, director, deputy director, or a member of the board of an international organization, or any other office by whatever name called similar to the offices mentioned above. Now, let me be clear, sir. This is not to be taken in the nature of a witch hunt. All it means is that as long as you hold any of those offices, that you are required for the first time to indicate that you so hold an office. Does it put your head above the parapet? Yes, it does. But nobody, sir, is required under the Charities Act to come and investigate you. Nobody is required to come under the Companies Act and do an investigation. But the fact of the matter is that for the purposes of transparency, for the purposes of meeting our prudential norms, you are now going to be required to check that box to say, yes, I am. Now, sir, my daughter just applied for a credit card. No, sorry, she applied to join a credit union. Not a credit card, a credit union. And in that application, my daughter had to state whether she was a politically exposed person. She said that for the first time she was wondering if she should deny that I'm her father. And I had to tell her, you gotta check the box. You got to check the box. So she's a politically exposed person. All of our children are. It doesn't mean that she's not going to get the credit union account. But it does mean, sir, that for the purposes of any money movement, if all of a sudden somebody who is a PEP deposited a significant amount of money that was out of concert with what they used to do before, then it raises a red flag. Plain and simple. Now, what's the downside? Well, the downside is that we have our privacy intruded into in a way that perhaps might make us wince. But the upside, sir, and we can't hide from this, is that it serves, even if you discount the terrorism threat, it serves to hold people who hold public office to a higher prudential standard. I believe that anybody who has been listening or observing how this new administration has been grappling with our last few months in office, they would recognize that no matter how inconvenient these things might be for ourselves, that we have not shied away from doing them. All of us are politically exposed persons. All of us hold prominent public office. But we have to be prepared to accept that with the grave responsibility and in some instances tremendous power that we are given, that we must always be accountable, sir. Plain and simple. Now, Mr. Speaker, I said to you that Barbados performed abysmally when we completed our mutual evaluation exercise in 2016. We were rated non-compliant on about 7 areas. We were rated low compliant on about 8 others. We didn't do that. And we have been given until June of this year to meet those minimum standards, or else we will be put on a further level, though, as you would expect, sir, a level that is a little bit more intrusive than we are in now. What we are in now is an enhanced follow-up process. which means that the state has given its commitment to make the necessary changes to its law and to submit those changes that we have made to the regional body, the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. I am pleased to say, sir, that on the 26th of March, Barbados submitted a report within time, because we were given a time period by which we had to file an updated report. And we believe that based on the progress that we've made, that we will be in a position to say that we do much better in our June assessment, sir. These pieces of legislation that we are bringing today, while having not passed them at the time when we submitted that March report, as long as we can get these pieces of legislation enacted by mid-May, these will allow us to score even higher in that evaluation exercise. Now, sir, what does all of this mean to the average Barbadian? Well, the problem with playing with the big boys is that you have to follow the big boys' rules. But more importantly than that, sir, is the fact that each of us rely every day on the ability of our banks to transact business with banks overseas, something called correspondent banking. Each of us relies every day on the ability of our local enterprises to trade without undue restriction in foreign areas. Each of us rely every day on the ability of Barbados as a domicile to attract overseas investors, because we are considered to be a well-ordered, well-run, and properly regulated domicile. We may not notice it, sir, but the ability of a Barbadian to buy a can of New Brunswick sardines on a shelf in a mini-mart in Black Bess depends on the ability of our banks through correspondent banking to make payments to overseas suppliers on behalf of the wholesaler who brought in the sardines, sir. The ability of an individual to conduct a simple credit card transaction, whether it is on Amazon or if they have a child going to university abroad and they want that child to be able to go and pay a utility bill. The ability, sir, of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital to be able to secure medication from overseas suppliers. The ability, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for you to purchase parts for your car, bulbs for your house, and wire, I don't know, to run an extension cord. All of these things rely on Barbados being able to meet the minimum standards so as to do business in the international arena. We might not like it. We may say that it offends our sovereignty. We may say, sir, that Big Brother is out to get us. But that is the situation that we live with. We didn't notice it last week. 2 years ago, we would have paid no attention to it. 20 years ago, this probably was not even on the radar. But every step of the way, we are always measured, and from time immemorial, we have been measured. And the standards which allow people to do business with Barbadian enterprises seamlessly are the very standards that we have to meet in relation to these overseas supranational bodies. For several years now, correspondent banking has been at risk in the Caribbean. And And permit me, sir, to try to give a simple explanation of correspondent banking. The economists in the chamber might be able to do a better job of it than me. But correspondent banking, sir, has to do with the ability of one bank to freely trade US dollars with another bank. I think that about sums it up, right? Yeah. Or put another way, sir, think of it like a plug. You know, a plug has a male and female end, and the two must fit. So if you try to plug in a plug in Barbados if you try to plug in a device from England at 220 volts with one plug, and you try to plug it into a plug in Barbados, it ain't gonna fit. The point is, sir, the institutions have to be able to handshake and to be compatible. The problem is that if our institutions do not meet the same prudential standard, so long as it is higher, of the other institution, then that institution says, I cannot do business with you. Plain and simple. Or put another way, sir, let's look at an example that might be a little bit more thing. We cannot sell fish in Europe. We can't. And the reason Barbados can't export fish to Europe is because European countries have a high level of what they call sanitary and phytosanitary compliance measures. In Barbados, our markets don't meet their minimum standard. So while we might love to send flying fish to England to be sold in Tesco's and so on, it doesn't happen simply because the standard of our markets does not meet the minimum standards of the markets in England or in France or in Germany. So in order for us to be able to export our fish and whatever else to those countries, we have to bring our standard up to theirs. Banking is not dissimilar, sir. Banking is not dissimilar. Those countries and those countries' financial institutions hold themselves out as meeting a particular high standard. And banks in countries like ours that want to do business with them freely trade US dollars. If they don't meet those standards, then, sir, we will have a problem. Plain and simple. Now, there's no doubt, sir, that some of these standards are sometimes not as freely employed, not as fairly employed as we would like. There was a recent instance, Mr. Deputy Chairman of the European Union, blacklisting Puerto Rico, American Samoa, and one or two other American dependencies. And in that instance, sir, the U.S. told its institutions to ignore the EU dictate. But the U.S. can afford to tell its institutions to ignore the UN, the EU dictates, because they are perhaps the single largest driver of international trade. If you want to do business, you're doing business in US dollars. And there's a good chance that you have to deal with American enterprises somewhere in the chain. So unless and until the Chinese currency takes over the international money market and becomes now the currency in which business is done, you simply have to deal with the US enterprises. Now, this, sir, is not a short-term commitment for us. There are 40 outcomes that Barbados has to comply with. We have a plenary to attend in Trinidad, where another peer review process will take place at the end of May. and I will come back to this chamber and to Barbados at the end of May and hopefully be able to report that we've done significantly better than we did in 2016. And I must not allow this chamber to forget that the last administration paid a consultant, a man who is now the Deputy General Secretary of their party, $300,000, and yet still Barbados scored abysmally in the rating. $300,000, sir, that could have gone to support the work of the QEH, went down the drain. And, sir, we have done it now, not by engaging consultants on this, but simply by establishing an interministerial subcommittee of cabinet whose responsibility it has been to shepherd the various ministerial departments through the changes that are required so as to be able to meet the standards, sir. And it hasn't cost us a penny. And when once we have passed the benchmarks that we're required to meet by June, there are other benchmarks that have to be met going forward, but I'm optimistic, sir, that by 2020, next year, Barbados could hopefully be out of this process altogether and be able to say that we are fully compliant with the FATF requirements. Now, that will take some negotiating. We have some more measures to put in place. We have to modernize our Customs Act. And there's some other pieces of legislation that we have to modernize. And within the next few weeks, sir, this chamber will be asked to agree to amendments to the Financial Services Act. We'll be asked to agree to amendments to the Money Laundering and Financing of Terrorism Act. We'll be asked to agree also to amendments to the Corporate and Trust Service Providers Act, sir. All of these are pieces of legislation and entities that intersect, sir, with how we operate especially as a place for doing business and how we regulate various enterprises. Mr. Speaker, one of the issues that is constantly attracting attention is the matter of attorneys at law and real estate agents. Attorneys at law do have a Legal Professions Act. There's a bar association that regulates the conduct of attorneys at law. The real estate agents, however, have no legislative body created by legislation that is responsible for directing their activity. The accountants, sir, they have international standards to meet, and there is ICAB, that is our Institute of Chartered Accountants of Barbados. They do some regulatory function. But the fact is that in this particular milieu, non-regulated entities that deal with money come under significant scrutiny, simply because it is perceived that real estate agents, lawyers, and accountants can be either wittingly or unwittingly the engines for the movement of money for either laundering or or financing terrorism. Now, that is not a unique Barbadian feature. The fact is that all across the globe, sir, these entities are looked on in that particular way. In our defense, I have to say that lawyers, real estate agents, anybody really, is required to meet the requirements of the money laundering legislation, which requires that practitioner, that business, to know its client. And part of knowing its client doesn't mean that he had dinner with you. It means that you've looked into his banking arrangements. You've gotten references from his lawyers and his accountants or whatever it is, so that you can establish for yourself that this is a person with a good reputation. But the fact is, sir, growing up in a society like Barbados, You know, the Prime Minister calls us a Kadir society because we say Kadir. Don't give him a break. Give him a break. Don't ask me for this. But you know, sir, under the rules today, any individual showing up in a law office and saying, I want you to do something for my mother. I want you to do something for me, sir, ought to be required by that practitioner to produce ID, to produce references from some kind of financial institution, and to be able to provide to that lawyer or accountant or real estate agent some evidence that you are a person of good report. But somehow or another, people seem to feel that it's too much to ask for. It's too much to ask for. So for years, sir, the bar has come under criticism because somebody comes in and they say, I work on a farm somewhere and I hurt my foot in the minibus and I want you to get compensation for me. No, know your client requirements, KYC, would stipulate that even that person should provide you with ID. And that person should provide you with a reference. But in the way in which we do things, sir, he probably come from Charo Bridge with me, so don't bother. And therefore, a lot of the things that our practitioners do fall well below the international standard. Now, there are things that have to change. There are things that have to change. I agree that sometimes the system can get ridiculous. So my son, 18 years old, has a summer job, and he decides he can put his money on the bank because his father can still give him $1, so he could spend what his father gave him and save the rest. So he goes to a commercial bank in Barbados and he applies for a bank account. We need your ID, young Marshall, and he produces it. They say, well, we need 2 utility bills. We need 2 utility bills for my 18-year-old son who at community college. And live home. I mean, honestly, it gets ridiculous. It really gets ridiculous. And if there's anything that you know, we have to right-size the things that we do to the environment that we're in. Because it will only discourage our young people from wanting to do the very thing that we think they should do. Setting up a bank account. Going to the credit union and saying, I want to open an account. You are now required to jump through hoops, sir. In fact, somebody told me that they got a letter from the bank. And the letter said, Dear Mr. Brown, I need you to come to the bank and present to us proof that you live, proof of your address. So the person carrying the letter that the bank sent them and say, well, here's the proof of my address. They said, no, we don't want that. We want a letter from somebody else. So, but you send me this letter at my address, I get it, and I bring it back to you. But despite the humor in this situation, when the member for St. Andrew wants to relate to the chamber personal experience, I will let him speak when the time comes. But if, you know, while we don't want to err too far on the side of laxness, we don't want to do that. We also need to say to our financial institutions that they must not follow these dictates blindly. They must not. Because if you do, because you know what happens now, you won't go and get a cell phone, and you won't go and get a bill phone. But you can't get a bill phone, perhaps because you ain't got the job. So you can't even say, so you got to go and get now a postpaid phone. So you will never have a bill to come home at you to carry to the bank so that you could open an account. I mean, you know, so a lot of these things, we just seem to apply rules mindlessly without trying to relate them to the existence and the circumstances that we lead. And really, I think, sir, that perhaps the time has come. Yes, we have to accept these prudential standards. But you know, sir, as a lawyer, I can tell you that I have acted for people who did not have a bank account. Now, I do not know how a person who does not have a bank account can go and get a reference from a bank to bring to me as a lawyer so that I could say, well, I have complied with the know your client standards. And I remember meeting a lady who said, well, you know, I said, well, you want us to work for you? Can you give us a reference from your last lawyer? And she said, me and he don't speak no more. So, you know, that reference ain't coming. The reference ain't coming. So sometimes, Mr. Speaker, we do have Mr. Speaker, we do put rules in place, but we have to be mindful of how we apply them and always make sure that there is some flexibility. And as a government, Mr. Speaker, we are not too, we shouldn't laugh too much because there are a lot of things that we require that the very rules that we put in place prevent us from doing what we commit to doing. And while you may consider it irrelevant, there was an instance recently. We've just committed to doing. This administration is committed to providing, setting aside 5% of our procurement. Is it 5% for small businesses and so on. And a small business. Individual who owns a small business told me, well, Mr. Marshall, I got a small contract from government, but I am required to provide a performance bond. Problem is that this individual, this small contractor, couldn't get a performance bond to save their life. So by the very rules that we put in place, we end up excluding the very people that we want to serve. And by similar reasoning, sir, the very prudential rules that we try to put in place to protect our money markets and our banking environment end up driving people who we want to come into the system away from the system. Mr. Speaker, our journey along this road is some distance from being at an end. And I'm enough of a cynic to believe that when once we cross this particular Rubicon and meet all 40 of these FATF criteria with flying colors, somebody is going to say, all right, well, we need to provide a few more hoops for you to jump through. And Mr. Speaker, we will cross that bridge when we come to it, but we must always be mindful, sir, that sometimes for reasons that we don't like to think about, there are people, sir, who always want to move the goalposts for countries like ourselves. In the 60s, when we got into international business, we saw it as the perfect avenue for growth in Barbados. We still had agriculture that was functioning then, but our leaders at the time understood that that could not sustain us beyond another generation or two. And that time came. And Barbados was able to ride that wave dealing with international business and do so well to the point where international business provided 66% of our corporation tax revenue. But international business meant, in the minds of the people in Europe and in the USA and Canada and so on, that we were taking taxpayers' dollars out of their pockets. And so they began, through various means, to try to dismantle our financial services sector. And that's when the OECD came up first with the harmful taxation agenda. And we did what we had to do, and we met that particular challenge head on and came out of it successfully. But no sooner did you get past that, sir, than another set of things were thrown at us, and we were asked to comply. And last year, we were asked to comply with the OECD standards, and we did, only to face, within 2 months, the specter of being blacklisted by the EU, having met the same OECD standards. I know I wouldn't say we're under threat of any blacklisting in relation to the FATF, but we have to meet these outcomes. And then once that's done, Lord knows there's going to be something else. But Barbadians are resilient people. We've always been. And despite how it might seem, Mr. Speaker, we've never lacked the courage to make the decisions that we have to make. So these two pieces of legislation may seem small, only amending the Companies Act in small areas and amending the Charities Act in even smaller areas. Under the Companies Act, sir, I need to mention that we now are focusing on the matter of beneficial ownership, and for the first time, beneficial ownership is now defined. Our Companies Act was based on a harmonized Companies Act model for the Caribbean, which itself was based on the Ontario Business Corporations model. At the time when we enacted this piece of legislation, it was cutting edge. At that time, sir, we focused on such matters as privacy of the individual, who the shareholders were not required to be declared, and so on. But the fact is that corporate structures are now being, and have, I suppose, for the longest time, being used by people to launder money. And therefore, the only way to nip it in the bud is to be able to look behind the corporate veil and see who the beneficial owners of the company happen to be from time to time. Now, that is something that we have resisted for years, because we've always felt that a person who set up a company in Barbados was entitled to anonymity, sir. Now, what we are saying in the amendment, Mr. Speaker, is that, let me give the chamber exactly 5. Let me refer the chamber to the specific provisions of the Companies Act. Sir, what we are now requiring of individuals who have companies, sir, is that at the corporate office, sir, they must now include an up-to-date and accurate record of the basic and beneficial ownership of the company, whether incorporated or registered in Barbados, sir. What is here now in Section 172 is that we must have the latest name, the name and latest known address of the shareholder, a statement of the number of shares and the date on which that person became a shareholder. So this information has to be kept at the registered office, not kept in the registry, not kept in a public place, but it has to be maintained at the registered office. But of course, sir, the shareholder may be a company. And even though our Companies Act does not recognize a trust, a named shareholder may not in fact be the beneficial owner. And we do have a large number of individuals who have companies in Barbados, and nothing is known of the persons who are behind as the beneficial owners, sir. And as part of this anti-money laundering thrust, companies will now be required to maintain a register of the beneficial owners at the registered office. So we've still tried, even though we're looking to meet the international best practice, we've tried, sir, to hold fast to the things that have always been precious to Barbadians, that you can't come and you can't just go up at the company's registry and say, I want to know who owns ABC Limited. You can't do it now. You will find out who the directors are. But in order for you to access that information, there's special, you can't just go and say, I want it. And therefore, we are continuing to protect the rights of the individual to their privacy, but we are requiring, sir, that at the registered office, there must be a register of the beneficial ownership maintained as part of the company's records. Mr. Speaker, these may seem to be small steps, but they are steps that it was important for us to make in order to be able to satisfy our FATF requirements. There are steps that we're required to take not just because there's some puppeteer pulling our strings, but because we have a lot at risk. We could sit back and be pugnacious and belligerent and say, we ain't doing it. We could do so. We ain't doing it. But what are the consequences of not doing it, sir? To us, the consequences could be that we would lose our ability to function as a state, having access to the very foreign exchange, the reserves of which we have tried to prop up and build up now to the tune of over $1 billion. But if Barbados and other countries in the region lose the ability to have correspondent banking, then the foreign reserves mean nothing. You could as well don't have any foreign reserves if you don't have correspondent banking, because you will not be able to function. You won't be able to spend it. You won't be able to get more. So as small as these steps are, sir, they're important to ensuring that Barbados meets the minimum standards required to assist in the global fight against terrorism and the global fight against anti-money laundering, against money laundering, sir. And don't fool yourself. Don't fool yourself. Money laundering is any time you take money that is the proceeds of a crime and put it through the banking system, however you do it, so that at the other end it is now distanced from the original criminal act. And a member of this chamber is currently in residence in the United States, and a former member, hopefully never to be a member again, is currently charged in the United States with money laundering. So this is not some figment of our imagination. This is not the product of a hyperactive mind. There are Barbadians who are charged before our courts for money laundering as we speak, sir. And therefore these measures are important in assisting us to discharge our obligations to ourselves as a well-regulated state and our obligations to the international polity of which we may be a small, but we consider ourselves to be an important member. With those words, I'm obliged to you, sir. I beg to move that the bill be read a second time. Second.
Member for St. Michael North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I rise to make a fairly short contribution to this debate this morning, I want to begin, of course, by congratulating the Honorable Attorney General for the very good work that he's done in bringing these pieces of legislation to Parliament today. And there are actually more that are here as well to be debated subsequently. Not quite 14, but
40?
Mr. Speaker, a substantial amount of important legislation, although the amendments may be quite concise. Mr. Speaker, just to give a little background, as I see it, as to where we are today, I believe, Mr. Speaker, to put it bluntly, that the events of 9/11 changed the world forever. Some things were in train before then, and the there was some nitpicking here and there to make things sort of what they're like today. But really the catalyst, Mr. Speaker, for why we are where we are today, doing the things we were doing, I would say, was really 9/11. That's when it was decided that the world was going to be divided into who were going to do what we are doing today and who were not going to do what we are doing today. In fact, I think, Mr. Speaker, that the expression was expressed to use that if you are not my friend, I think this was said actually at one stage by the then President of the United States, if you are not my friends, you're not with us, then you are our enemies. And therefore, small states like ours really had little choice but to start to fall in line from way back then, certainly particularly, Mr. Speaker, after 9/11. Hence the sort of positions that are being seen today. Barbados really has, no one can point a finger and say that Barbados is in any way involved in the terrorist movement around the world. You may get a few foolish people running around Barbados doing foolishness, especially now, terrorizing the place, using that term loosely. But Barbados is not a place where terrorism festers or there's any cultivation of a terrorist mindset. But we are caught up, Mr. Speaker, in doing what we are doing here today, because as the Honorable Attorney General said, we have sometimes no choice whatsoever. And we have to play by certain rules, although really and truly they have almost no applicability or relevance to us as Barbadians or as Barbados. Institutions, as the AG, as the Honorable Attorney General has said, like the OECD and the European Union, have come to dominate issues that now plague the world, and we have to fall in line. We are members of what is called the inclusive framework of the OECD. We are not perhaps members of the OECD per se, but the inclusive framework of the Forum on Harmful Tax Practices. And we therefore get to have a little say in the formulation and direction of certain policy intentions of that organization. But even then, Mr. Speaker, we still have to fall in line pretty much with what comes out at the end of the day. We are not members of the European Union at all in any sense whatsoever. But yet still we are now being told almost on a daily basis what we have to do by the European Union. And we were recently blacklisted by the European Union because we dared to ask for details of what it was you were asking us to do. You sent the details the day after you blacklisted us, and we had discussions since then. It has now been realized that the requests in these details are not, in fact, insurmountable. So we have committed to that, Mr. Speaker. We have committed to doing that, which we could have done before if we'd gotten those details and avoided blacklisting. Now, the consequence, Mr. Speaker, as the Honorable Attorney General has said, of not doing things that you're called upon to do, or plain, powerful, foolish, as we say in Barbados, is that you get the sort of blacklistings that you get, and then you're woefully surprised at the reaction. Because I'm fascinated at the fact that an entity could be doing business with Barbados with no problems at all, no concerns about what we are doing or our standards in any way, up to today, and we get blacklisted today unfairly, and then by tomorrow, you're getting a whole host of queries and threats about whether or not we can continue doing business with you based on a blacklisting yesterday, although you were doing business with me up to the day before and had no problems at all with what we were doing. And that fascinates me, Mr. Speaker, but it really is the reality that you go out and you take certain principled positions, and God helps you if you even can't do it by virtue of your lack of access to the resources to do it sometimes. Because come hell or high water, if it is not done by the day stipulated, you find yourself faced with all sorts of categorizations, classifications, and listings, Mr. Speaker. So I am not one who is going to stand here and disagree with the Attorney General's assertion that that's the case, because it is the case. I have lived through it. I had to do it, suspend some 6-7 months last year, meeting deadlines. And what is worse, Mr. Speaker, is that these two organizations that I just referred to, and I'm sure there'll be others as well, sometimes their requirements conflict with each other. And you're then caught up in even greater confusion, because we met a standard imposed by the OECD, only to hear from the European Union that was not the standard that they were going to accept. So we are like just little pawns being pushed around, Mr. Speaker. Yes, in a tug of war between bigger entities. And what is the rub salt in the wounds, Mr. Speaker? What you find happening is that the European Union, OECD, but I can speak to the European Union more specifically, when stipulations are laid down as to what you need to do, they then go on to tell you that you can get technical assistance from them to do it. So it's jobs to the boys as well, Mr. Speaker. That's a fact. So we are caught up in a vortex, in a real-world scenario, where you just have to do certain things that you would prefer not to do. And the cost of challenging these things, be it in the court, the International Court of Justice or wherever else, Mr. Speaker, is so enormous. And the result is not sure anyhow, because God knows who will control those institutions anyway, that you just decide, well, we will, for the sake of peace, order, and good government, ensure that we meet the stipulations and maintain our good name, because these things result, Mr. Speaker, in reputational hits. And sometimes they are designed to be reputational hits, because sometimes there are no substance to the decisions taken, no justification, but you get the hit, Mr. Speaker, and then you have to crawl your way back up then out of the hole at a time when you're getting all the calls and the comments suggesting we do not want to do business with a country that is blacklisted. Therefore, either get off the list or else, Mr. Speaker. So, but we are where we are today. I do not anticipate that come May, Barbados will still be on the blacklist. But we've had to do it, Mr. Speaker, at the cost that I sort of outlined just now. Mr. Speaker, I accept that there is need for tough laws when it comes to money laundering. No one wants to know that they are a part of the facilitating of money laundering. So I fully accept that the changes that are before us were necessary. I accept the change in the Companies Act in relation to non-profit companies. I accept the changes in the Charities Act in relation to the stipulations there as well, as to who the requirements that have to be stated when you seek to establish a not-for-profit company or charity. Because, as the Honorable Attorney General has said, these are entities that can be used fairly easily and improperly so. They are used, I would say, 99% of the time honorably, and I believe that a large number of us in this chamber have organizations like that. None of us in here, I can say, has ever used any funds put into that dishonorably. Neither have we ever sought funds from any dishonorable source. But it is a fact that they can be used to facilitate unwanted behavior here and further afield. So I accept that. But, Mr. Speaker, what I will continue to have a problem with is what appears to be the unrelenting targeting of the politically exposed person. I touched on this before, and I believe it's something I'm going to touch on. I'm getting my phone, Mr. Speaker, because I want to refer to something that is in here. And Mr. Speaker, the politically exposed person. If you look at the amendment to the Charities Act, for example, and I'm sure it's the same thing replicated in the amendment to the Companies Act, there are 9 categories of people, of persons here, who would be deemed to be prominent political prominent public officers. And of the 9, 3 are dedicated to people politically associated or politically involved. 1/3 of the categories of people. It was intended to make sure that nobody at all who even thinks about politics could escape this, Mr. Speaker. And I'm at a loss to understand what is the fixation with the political person. It is an honorable job, and a far back you said somebody got to do it. It is a very, very honorable job. And to find that you're always targeted. I have gotten reports from people now who work in commercial bank. This individual who was involved with someone who was a politician. The relationship is ending, and they still threw a form at that person in the bank saying you now have to disclose that you are a politically exposed person based on your former relationship. So, Mr. Speaker, when does it really end? When does it really end? What is wrong with being a politician? And I, Mr. Speaker, you will be surprised to know, I'm sure, that it has gone to such an extreme now that a few weeks ago, my personal assistant, who is a signatory to an account or branch account at Scotiabank, and I'm calling the bank because it needs to be named, got a call, Mr. Speaker, and then followed up by a letter indicating, the Honourable for St. Thomas said that she got hers as well, indicating, I can read the letter. Nothing wrong. Just 1 second, Mr. Speaker.
Take your time.
Yeah. The letter is dated March 25th and is addressed to the St. Michael North Branch BLP, attention, name personal assistant. Dear X, Scotiabank has undertaken a strategic review of its operations in the Caribbean, Central America, and Uruguay, and as a result has decided that we will no longer be able to serve your account based on Scotiabank's internal policy. That, Mr. Speaker, is the opening sentence. I want to assure you that this decision was not taken lightly. We greatly appreciate your support as a customer. However, at this point in time, in accordance with the financial services agreements governing your account, the bank gives you 60 days notice that it will be closing your account with the bank. Please make all necessary arrangements to bring your accounts to a zero balance on or before Friday, May 24, 2019. We will work together on accommodating your needs in transferring your accounts. Until the transfer date, your services to Scotiabank will continue as usual. And prior to that, Mr. Speaker, a discussion that took place between my personal assistant and the individual who signed the letter, who is there Wayne Carrington, branch manager. She was told that Scotiabank has decided that they are no longer handling political accounts. So, Mr. Speaker, when Scotiabank sends out that notice, that letter, it is only a matter of time now before you get things from the other bank. So when you switch your accounts now to another bank, it's only a matter of time before you get a letter from that bank also saying that they will not be handling political accounts. So, Mr. Speaker, where are we supposed to put the money? Where are politicians and branches and so on?
We are not supposed to have money.
we don't have money much at best. But where are we supposed to put the money now when commercial banks decide that we are these outlaws? But that's basically what we're saying. We are outlaws and Perez. We cannot have accounts. And you know, the thing about these things here, a lot of these categories were generated by banks, you know. These categories are people that constitute prominent political officers. But I don't know what is the big difference between these and a bank manager. I don't know. What is the difference between a politician and a bank manager in terms of possibility of being corrupted? But I know some people who on the record shows, as the man for the city is saying, I know some bank managers used to be who are not bank managers today, and young, nowhere near retirement age, but no longer bank managers. And then when you answer a question, you get some vague little response trying to hide up the fact that they were involved in giving loans for cutbacks. That's a fact. You get that? But yet still, they have the audacity to be sending forward and saying that we have to take this position and targeting 1/3 of the categories of people here are politically rooted, Mr. Speaker, as if we are some sort of Perez. So, Mr. Speaker, I have no difficulty in supporting what is here today. I just feel that sometimes people can go to unnecessary extremes in doing certain things, and I think it's unfortunate that we, and I repeat it, that we are the lawmakers of this land, and we are the ones who sit back and do nothing to fight back and push these people back, to make them understand that we make the laws and we can insist on certain standards and a certain level of respect for everybody in this country, including, Mr. Speaker, the political class. Mr. Speaker, I don't have a lot more to say, just the last point of the member for the Attorney General on beneficial ownership. This is an issue that was also one of the, it surfaced in one of the things we were asked to do by the European Union. They have subsequently said that they have no, at this stage, they're not in a position yet to put it on the agenda as a firmed up, as an issue that is firmed up in terms of what they see the criteria and requirements to be. But I can say, Mr. Speaker, I heard the Attorney General, the view that beneficial ownership should be accessible only by kept at the registered office of the company. But I can assure you, Mr. Speaker, that the European Union is going to be pushing for more than that. Based on the initial comments so far, they seem to be thinking that there should be much broader access to beneficial ownership and disclosure of beneficial ownership than it merely being kept in a register on the premises of an office. That's a fact. So we know, Mr. Speaker, whenever they decide to put it on the agenda now as a somewhat firmed up set of criteria, we're going to be having to deal with now where beneficial ownership should be kept, if it should be on private premises, if it should be in a government registry, and if so, who should have access to it, when should there be an entitlement to request and get the information contained in that beneficial ownership register. Mr. Speaker, those are issues that are yet to be determined. So I hear the Attorney General, but I just want to assure him that the fight is not yet over, Mr. Speaker. And with those few words, Mr. Speaker, I am obliged to you.
Thank you. Member for St. James Central.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I undertake not to detain the House very long, but this is a matter about which I feel very strongly, and I think I would really want to make an intervention and begin on the same note that my friend who just took his seat began by thanking and congratulating the Attorney General on the on the legislation which has been piloted before the House. Mr. Speaker, sir, there's one aspect of it that I wish to direct the Chamber's attention to, and that is this matter of the correspondent banking, to which the Attorney General would have drawn our attention. And I'm particularly concerned, sir, not just about the loss of correspondent banking relationships, but the associated concept of de-risking, where at the financial centers of the world, financial institutions are deliberately making a judgment call that they will withdraw themselves and their services. And it therefore creates a disconnect between small and already vulnerable economies like ours and the global financial and the global trading system. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is entirely clear that while it is true that there have been instances, not only in the so-called third world or the so-called developing world, of political actors or political persons taking advantage and abusing the office that they have, but those things happen in the so-called first world, so-called industrialized world as well. all across the United States of America, there are stories to be told of governors and mayors and leaders of members of Congress, leaders of the political establishment in the United Kingdom as well, in Canada as well, who have gotten their priorities wrong and their sense of morality and propriety twisted. But, Mr. Speaker, sir, what disturbs me is that a very heavy-handed approach to enforcement started to manifest itself in the international financial system around 2012, and a British firm by the name of bank by the name of HSBC would have been fined approximately $1.9 billion for not properly complying with regulatory requirements. The horse seemed to gallop from that stable, sir, immediately. All hell proverbially broke loose. And that was in 2012. By July of 2014, Mr. Speaker, sir, a bank by the name of BNP Paribas would have been fined $8.9 billion for effectively the same failure to follow compliance regulations. Now, again, this is part of the challenge that requires, in my view, a robust and unrelenting conversation between us, who are the small and the affected economies, and the rest of the world. And this conversation must, I think, Mr. Speaker, sir, take place not only as Barbados speaking to the rest of the world, but as Barbados continuing to interact with CARICOM, Barbados continuing to interact with all other small island developing states globally, because our voices have to be heard on this matter. When once you come to a point where you penalize a bank to the tune of $8.9 billion for failing to comply with regulatory requirements, Mr. Speaker, sir, that approach makes the banks automatically more risk-averse. They, instead of working towards building relationships with the customer, and you heard the learned Attorney General talk about the rules, they set down rules, telling you must know your customer. And then they went further and said you must know your customer's customer. But you can't have any relationship. That can only happen in a relationship experience. But if the risk of making a mistake is so high that's to attract an $8.9 billion United States dollars fine, then, Mr. Speaker, sir, what do? They flee. They say, I'm not going to expose myself to the risk. I would rather not do business and pull out of the jurisdiction. And that, unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, sir, is the ugly story that has to be told in this matter. That to protect themselves from penalties, we have large financial institutions around the world who are saying that the cost of compliance is simply too high, and they are doing what they call de-risking, removing themselves from taking a risk. And what has that meant for the Caribbean? This is why I say, sir, that I've spoken to this while I was on the other side of the House, sir, in opposition. I spoke to a parliament at that time, Mr. Speaker, sir, that was led by a government that I genuinely believe could not be moved to trouble itself to even try to care. I may have said too much. I genuinely believe they could not be moved to trouble themselves to even try to care. And what were the facts then? The facts then, Mr. Speaker, sir, was that Latin America and the Caribbean were becoming among the hardest hit by this phenomena. And it is especially worrisome for us because we are the small entities, small economies, that must trade in financial services as a critical component of our economic development tools. The offering of financial services at an international level across borders. Well, outside of tourism, the next major economic earner is international financial services. And that is what this legislation here today is trying to help us to protect. But, Mr. Speaker, sir, in Belize, what happened? And I think we as a country have to now look at this thing, and we have to have the conversation among ourselves. I said this at a branch meeting that was convened by my friend, the honorable member for St. James South, before she was the member for St. James South. I remember speaking to that branch and telling them that, look, this election or that election that was coming, the last election, well, it was about a number of issues. Perhaps the largest of the issues would be, how does Barbados and by extension the Caribbean now have a conversation with the rest of the world about our financial existence? Because that is what it is a threat to. About the challenge that is mounted to the very ability of our people, as you heard the Attorney General say, young people that can't open a bank account, that have to go through hoops in Bridgetown every day in order to do what their mothers and fathers and the priests and the pastor in church tell them do. Be honest, earn a day's living the correct way, and put a little piece of money one side to save for a rainy day. But our own system is beginning to make it impossible for them. And it is not a laughing matter, Mr. Speaker, sir. The fact of the matter is that if you look at what happened in Belize, only 2 of 9 banks, 2 of 9, which held correspondent banking relationships outside of Belize, were able to retain their correspondent banking relationship. Sorry, 2 of 9 were able to retain 1 correspondent banking relationship. So that virtually every bank in Belize was cut off from the rest of the world. Now, pray tell me, sir. And the figures in Belize are astounding, because that represented in aggregate more than 2/3 of their economy. How do you cut off a small developing state from doing business with the rest of the world, from receiving payments, from moving money for transactions done in that country outside of, to places outside of the country? How do we cut off our young students who leave home and tell mommy and daddy goodbye, I'm going to university in Germany to study engineering because I've been offered a job with BMW or Mercedes-Benz, but you can't send them 5 cents because you have no connection with the outside world? This thing actually impacts on the ability of money lending, money transfer companies to move money as well. And we all know it. All of us have constituents who know what it is to have to rely on, and I want advertising about the business, but Western Union is one of them. We all know get a little money sent down from overseas because things tough. And that is true in Jamaica, it is true in Antigua, it is true in St. Vincent. In fact, there are some parts of the Eastern Caribbean where their economies rely more on that money coming in than they rely on what they actually earn by way of trade. And Mr. Speaker, sir, when once these small, vulnerable economies are placed in a perilous position where they can be cut off from the rest of the outside world by this phenomenon that we know as de-risking, it is mandatory, I believe, and that's really all I came to this house to say today, because I really do not feel well. I'm doing too many 18-hour days, sir. But the fact of the matter is, we are going to spin top in mud. I said this to my friend, the Minister of Finance, yesterday when we were speaking about the matter of international trade. We will fail largely because of the fact that the rest of the world is turning a deaf ear to the existential reality of small islands like ours. This is about the ability of our people to do exactly what we want the people to do. Legitimate business enterprise. Earn a living. We tell all of our young people now, you've got to think not only in terms of little Barbados, 166 square miles, but do your business across borders. Got a single market and economy. CARIFORUM, that opens the door to the Dominican Republic and Cuba. You say, look further. We have trade relations, trade negotiated. We have negotiated markets now that give you market access to Costa Rica and Chile and all around the Latin American continent, with Europe as well. But the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is meaningless if you can't move the money. And the fact is that we have now to have as part of the dialogue an understanding in the places that really matter. And I keep saying that part of what I fear is that we sell ourselves too short as a people. And I'm going to say this in this House once again, for the first time in government, because I only had a chance to speak about this before in opposition. The United States of America and Great Britain and Canada are major trading partners. But beyond major trading partners, they are also the home, away from home, of several, not only Barbadian, but Caribbean people, small island people. That which I talked about in Belize happened also, but to a lesser extent, in Antigua. Happened also, but to a lesser extent, in Jamaica. We get spared down here from the full onslaught of it so far. But I want us now to recognize that the United States government is going to have a major election next year. That there are people who call themselves Democrats running all through New York, where our people live. Running all through Chicago, where our people live. Running all through Boston, where our people live. In cities where they live in large numbers. And part of our dialogue must be, part of the conversation must now be that we have to have our people also speaking to those people who come knocking on their doors. To say, yeah, I hear you, but it ain't just about the border. It ain't just about the Mexicans that you see come across the border star. Because when you turn on CNN or MSNBC, you will think that the only issue in the United States of America is people who come across the southern border. Part of the dialogue must also be, what position are you prepared to take so that there is fairness in the international community? So that people like us that come from small countries, that trying to do the right thing, get a fair opportunity as well. How is it that you are going to be able to be elected, but you go into the Congress or the president's office and with a stroke of a pen destroy the lives of hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people from small parts of the world? And then, as the minister responsible for international business tell you, turn around and say, well, look, we will do a consultancy. Pay us a little bit of money, and we will come down there and help negotiate with you how you could solve how you could work your way through the problem. So they get more still. And Mr. Speaker, sir, that cannot be allowed to go on. And I genuinely feel that even though there is an instinct to say that we are powerless because we are small, we are powerful because we are large in numbers. Barbados is small by itself, but this amount of small island states, the amount of vulnerable economies are plentiful. And this must be an issue that is placed front burner and kept front burner. It is like climate change and global warming. That too is an existential threat. And we have to be prepared to speak to others about the reality of our existence. That our existence the very existence can be compromised. And over foolishness, Mr. Speaker, sir, I say in closing, because it is counterproductive. But if you cut off Belize from doing business with the rest of the world, and you say that your major interest is money laundering, prevention of money laundering, and terrorism, but what are the places that the terrorists are looking for? The places the terrorists are seeking out is those places that are cut off financially from the rest of the world, where there's tremendous poverty, where there's tremendous alienation from the financial system, and they can come in there and exploit the minds of young people who have a dream of living a better life, but cannot do so in the land where they are. And they say, boy, look, come, this is where if you believe in X, Y, Z, and if you follow this doctrine, they can have you eat whatever you want, even if it is getting 7,000 virgins where you go to the great beyond. Some of them believe that will happen. But the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is counterproductive. We cannot solve a problem of this type by antagonizing or creating a backdrop where there will be greater inducement for the problem that we're talking about to spread. And that is the fatal flaw. It is a discussion, sir, that I believe must be had in the corridors of the IMF. It must be had in the corridors of Washington, D.C., in the presidential, the White House. It must be had, Mr. Speaker, sir, in the corridors of the Inter-American Development Bank. It must be had, Mr. Speaker, sir, in Brussels and all the diplomatic places and offices that we have. It must be had with the World Trade Organization and every other multilateral institution. Because, Mr. Speaker, sir, we are, if this process continues, we can't, look, you know how many times we've come and done this? Every year or two, or sometimes more frequently, we come to this place to chop and change a piece of legislation to conform. And as soon as you've conformed, Mr. Speaker, sir, the time go back and do piece more. It was in December that we came here and we reduced taxation in this country to 5% and less. Huh? Converge. Yes, converge. We brought the convergence. And then, Mr. Speaker, sir, within weeks, these people tell you that ain't good enough. They still got more to do. And you know, slavery, sir, slavery took on many forms. You could give a man liberty and tell him you are free. But if in your mind, if in your heart of hearts, you believe that you still have a right to control his very existence, he will never be free unless he can emancipate himself from that situation. And we, sir, I believe, must emancipate ourselves. And that can only be done via the dialogue that is necessary, sir. It is a matter that we cannot deal with by ourselves, but it is a matter that we must galvanize global attention to and hold their feet to the fire, because too many of our people stand to be threatened by this, Mr. Speaker. So I am obliged to you.
Obliged. Member for Christchurch East Central.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I want to support the Honourable Attorney General in the legislation he's brought to the Chamber to deal with what is a very important matter affecting the country. And as the Honourable Member for St. James Central just articulated, we have found ourselves in a situation where just under a year ago we came to office, sir, and we have done so many different things in the last 11 months. It is almost mind-boggling that we are here now addressing, or starting to seek to address, I should say, issues relating to money laundering and these financial matters. But as we move through this Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Program, sir, the success of this government and certainly this country relies on our ability, sir, just to do business. And I think what the previous member and certainly the previous members have contributed to this debate so far, if Barbados is unable to effectively conduct business with the world, sir, and you heard the Prime Minister in the budget saying that our business in the world and the world is our business. The reality, sir, is that as we seek to do the reforms within our domestic space, if we cannot conduct business with the world, sir, in a way that allows for our citizens to take advantage of any opportunity, then we will find ourselves cut off. We will find ourselves certainly with a serious problem where the expectations, sir, of the future of this country in terms of the young people, there will be potential fallout. And that's something that a government, sir, responsible for the discharge of the affairs of the country will seek to mitigate. But, sir, this debate, I'm not sure to the extent that the average citizen may appreciate the substance of what we are discussing here today, because the reality is, sir, that whilst we have always been a country in the vanguard of doing what we believe is right, certainly, what is principle, the reality is that sometimes, sir, standing by those principles, certainly in this current environment, seems to be posing a challenge for some. But this government intends to stay the course. But I want, sir, to share with you just a little personal anecdote as part of this discussion, because when we came to office last year, sir, and the Prime Minister appointed her cabinet, those of us in cabinet, we had to declare our assets. They are currently held in trust in the cabinet office until such time as the Integrity Commission is established. And in making those declarations, sir, certainly for my own benefit, certainly you had to declare all the assets that you had. And I want to say to you, sir, that I lived in the United Kingdom for about 5 years, just short of 5 years, my wife and I. And we still maintain some assets in the United Kingdom. Furthermore, sir, I would say that in maintaining the bank account that we had, and I use the word had, in the United Kingdom, dividends will be paid into the account from activities taking place within the United Kingdom. We would use those monies, sir, to pay for insurance policies that we had in the United Kingdom. And the reality, sir, is having moved home in 2010, that continued like normal. And so any audit of those accounts in the United Kingdom on our part will show the money came from here and went there. I received, sir, a letter in October of last year from the Royal Bank of Scotland saying that their records indicate that I am now a member of the government of Barbados, a minister, and so therefore they will be closing those accounts within 60 days. October 1st, actually, was the date of the letter. Yeah. Now, the honourable member for Sim, Michael North, indicated what is so wrong with, well, the notion of being politically exposed. Precisely what is it that the Royal Bank of Scotland, in examining accounts that we held since 2005, all that time, and as the member for St. Michael North indicated, what is it that would have triggered them to close our accounts when they can look at the activity? There's no money laundering. The monies are coming from UK activities, bona fide companies in the UK, who all fall under the same rules and regulations that set certainly within that jurisdiction. But the people of Christchurch is essentially determined that they want me to represent their interests in this place. So why, sir, would any rational person think that there's something wrong with being a politician? But, sir, the account was closed. So in order for me now, sir, to maintain my life insurance policy that we have in the UK, I now have to get a friend of mine to pay the premiums so that I can maintain the insurance and then reimburse that person. Now, sir, I'm raising this because that arrangement in my mind does not make any sense whatsoever at all. But this is what they say that needs to happen, that you can only service the account from a UK-based account, and so therefore we've had to make some, it's not underhanded, but it's an awkward arrangement to ask someone to which no, it doesn't make sense. But the reality, sir, is these decisions that are taken arbitrarily obviously impact people's lives. And I think that to the extent, sir, that we are going through this process in terms of streamlining the way that we do business, and I think I would want to speak to some of the initiatives that we would want to, through the Ministry of Finance, to start to address some of these rather substantive issues. But the mere fact, sir, that that you can just make a determination that because one is now an elected member of parliament, that somehow or the other, or as the member for St. Michael North indicated, that a bank can determine that it is no longer going to service the account of branches of a political party. I mean, all the members of this chamber who have served in the past and will serve in the future, sir, we represent branches within our political system. All of our branches do works, they raise funds, they do fish fries, they do all kinds of things, sir, within the community. And the notion that you will not service a political institution is something that we have to effectively address, and we will brainstorm on that, sir, and determine the appropriate policy response with respect to that. But having said that, sir, if you use the fact that we are a tourist destination, persons come here from all over the world and engage in all kinds of things. And to the extent that John Brown from Ohio or John Brown from Surrey may have traveled to Barbados on holiday, and John Brown may bring some cash with him, and he might go into Marhill Street here, sir, and play a few slots with monies that he brought from the jurisdiction from which he's come, sir. And then for us then to indicate that attracting tourists to the jurisdiction who come with monies to spend, sir, but somehow getting those monies to filter back into the banking system becomes a problem simply because the vendor in Marhill Street, sir, they don't know who John Brown. They don't know where he get the money from that he brought to Barbados to spend on vacation. So how is the merchant in Marhill Street to know John Brown and where he got the money from? And the reality is, sir, that these are some of the peculiarities in these new arrangement that we have to make sure that our people, sir, can conduct business and do so in a way that is not prohibitive. Now, sir, it really does pain me that we have come here to be discussing these specific issues, especially relates to banking and hearing that accounts are being closed. Because the truth is, sir, with the rate of interest that banks are providing these days, the truth is that I'm not sure that we are in a position that the customer really should be taking this kind of abuse. But having said that, sir, one of the things that the Ministry of Finance we are working on, sir, and we have to work with the entire financial system, is to try to bring some regularity to this process. Because as we seek, sir, to move to a much more digital platform, we believe that the solutions that we will be rolling out over the course of the next few years will deal specifically, sir, with some of these issues. I wouldn't say all, but some of these issues, because in effect, sir, legal tender, which is cash, the central bank issues, we pay the central bank, or on the behalf of the people of Barbados, the central bank issues cash, which is still legal tender. And to the extent that cash becomes a problem in terms of traceability, then we are proposing, sir, that over the course of the next few years that we start the process of digitizing the cash in the economy. And move to a stage, sir, where the use of mobile applications and digital platforms allows for transactions to take place. Now, I would say to citizens, in much the same way as persons may keep physical cash in their wallets or at home in a safe or what have you, that the use of a mobile wallet, sir, gives the ability for persons to keep their money, because if putting it in the bank, sir, does not yield you any significant rate of return, then there's no reason to have a bank account. And moving to a digital platform, sir, gives greater flexibility, certainly for young people who want to engage in business. And it also allows, sir, for that element of traceability, such that with the issuance of a digital note, sir, which at the moment I can give you, if I come to your store and I take the physical bill out of my wallet and give to you, you don't sit down and write down every serial number that comes in to your store. So you don't know that it is me that gave you that $20 note with that particular serial number on it. But the reality, sir, is that in a digital framework, which we are seeking to move to as quickly as we can in terms of modernizing the economy and the way the digital payments platform will operate, that in introducing that helps to solve, in part, the problem of traceability and issues relating to money laundering. Because if you know, in part, sir, the specific notes, how the money has been transferred through the economy, then that helps to address the issues of money laundering, because you can trace, sir, where transactions are taking place, how monies are moving, and therefore that should take care of that side with respect to some of the issues relating to money laundering. But, sir, as these regulations become more and more onerous, and I think the truth is, sir, is that the member for St. James Central really hit a solid note, because as usual, sir. What we are, in effect, trying to determine for ourselves, sir, is a level of financial sovereignty that allows for the individual to make a determination of how they want to take care of their own affairs. And the question that will arise, certainly, sir, in the 21st century is going to be a very basic and fundamental question, would be, do we still need the same structure with respect to the provision of banking services that we had in the 20th century in the 21st century? And out of all of this innovation, sir, which we are seeking to unleash on our citizens, then what is being put in place to maintain a structure? Because there's a belief, sir, that we need banks because of the old system. But as financial innovation, sir, is taking root globally, and that there's more and more dispersion of technology, sir, the old systems are beginning to crumble. And as the old systems crumble, people are seeking to hold on for as long as possible, using remnants of that system to maintain vestiges of power that are slowly, sir, diminishing. And whilst we would want to assure our citizens that this government will try to make sure that we engage persons in good faith, that we cannot, sir, just blindly go ahead and sign on to every and anything simply because of the dictates of those in the old metropoles. The reality is, sir, is that we have to re-engage all of our partners, and I say partners not just in the north, but certainly in the south. Because as the honorable member for St. James Central indicated, many persons in this region, from Jamaica in the west to Guyana in the south, sir, we rely on remittances from our families in the so-called diaspora. And the ability, sir, to be able to move those monies, that ability is critical, sir, to the functioning of a lot of our economies. And as we seek to, and we have said to our young people that we want you to be able to take advantage of any opportunity globally. And so a lot of the discussion about whether it's with the OECD, whether it's with the EU, whether it's with the IMF, or any any of the institutions that we operate with, we cannot survive, sir, in a world where the goalposts keep changing day after day, month after month, and with no certainty with respect to how we will be able to engage the affairs of our citizens. And whilst we are going to be working domestically to make sure that we make it easier to do business and to get things done in Barbados, the reality is that we now must also mobilize across CARICOM and globally to make sure that small countries, small states, can also do business in a way that gives confidence to those persons providing the services externally to us that what we are doing doesn't pose a threat to them and that there's a way to do that. But the old approach, sir, of just cutting off access because you don't like a position that I took last week in a particular forum does not really make sense in the context of being able to provide global stability because, sir, the reality is that we are in an information age, and in this information age, sir, as we seek to utilize all the technologies available to governments to be able to make better decisions on behalf of their citizens, we have to share this information, sir, with our partners, because as things develop, sir, our focus must be to make sure that we protect our citizens first and that we engage our partners to make sure then that we are, not, I won't use the term compliant, but that we are working in partnership, sir, to make sure that the greater good of everyone is served. And I think, sir, that as we start to have these bigger discussions, sir, with the citizens about what is required of Barbados to be able to operate in a global environment, things are changing at a very rapid pace, and we must not shy away, sir, from the challenges. Because unless we are in the thick of things, in the midst of things, sir, you will be left behind unless you engage. And whilst the previous government, sir, would have completely disengaged from any meaningful engagement on any of these issues, sir, this government, we are intended to make sure that we create a path such that our citizens can be assured that where problems arise, we will seek to have them addressed in as timely a manner as possible, simply because we understand, sir, that what may threaten Jamaica or Trinidad, sir, eventually would threaten Barbados. What threatens Latin America, sir, eventually threatens Barbados. And so when we say, sir, that we want to be a zone of peace in this Caribbean space, sir, that whilst intervention in Venezuela, whether militarily, financially, or otherwise, sir, creates a problem for stability in the region, sir, we will speak to that simply because, sir, we are leaders. And as we lead, sir, we know that sometimes the road will be rough, the waters will be choppy, but at the end of the day, sir, we must make sure that we are in the thick of things, because if you're not a part of the conversation, at least, sir, then you pretty much leave yourself at the whims and fancies of the decision-making that's taking place in the global capitals. And, sir, so this piece of legislation that we are debating today, sir, is important, but I want to assure the citizens, sir, that the government, and certainly through the Ministry of Finance, we are seeking to create a solution that allows for business to be done, certainly within the country, in a way that meets these anti-money laundering standards. But at the same time, sir, we want to carve out an opportunity to make sure that Barbados, and by extension the region, that we can conduct our business globally and do so in a manner that is befitting the international economy. And, sir, with those 2 words, I'm obliged to you.
Yeah, I'm obliged to you. Member for St. Michael West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Just a few brief remarks to contribute to the debate today. And I will not seek to locate the debate in Europe or some other part of the geography of the international arena, but would want to touch on a few realities relative to the matter here on the ground. I think much has been said, as can be said on this matter, and properly said by the Honorable Attorney General in his introductory presentation, eloquently put by the Honorable Member for St. James Central, which of course is his customary manner, and also clearly spoken to by the Honorable Minister of International Business and so forth. The three of them, though, seem to, I have to say to you, it sort of evoked a little bit of sentiment of sympathy from myself, because they spoke as though to suggest to us that we are but small fish, a small fish in a rather large ocean, and we must go where the currents take us. Sounds almost totally acquiescent, but I understand where we are as a country, as an economy. I understand where we are as a region. I understand where we are as developing states in relation to these matters and the pressures that are brought to bear upon our economy and the challenges to our sovereignty. So I say that they appear to be somewhat acquiescent, not to put any measure of criticism against their names today, but simply to say that the expressed sentiment by them clearly underscores the reality that is a part of the path for us in this world, dominated as it has been for quite some time by imperial and neoliberal powers who seek to ensure that their will prevails against our interests, which is often the case. But the reality is, on the ground, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that individuals not only indulge in criminal behavior, but so do companies. Individuals not only indulge in criminal behavior, but companies do. And so we have to accept the basic truth that we have to operate in our space and conduct our affairs in such a manner as to counter any impulse on the part of companies present among us, whether they're domestic companies or international companies operating here. We have to so operate in our space and so govern ourselves and manage our corporate culture as to ensure that we properly counter any disposition of companies among us to engage in criminal behavior, because that is part of the reality of the world. So I don't think we're simply responding to pressure from overseas or international institutions. We're also doing what is in our best interests so to do, to ensure that our corporate culture is as sanitized, or elsewhere I would say as sanctified as it might be. And that must be a principal concern of ours, that those who operate in our corporate space are not so defiled by corrupt practices that they stain our economy. We are already struggling, and that's part of the reality which we face when we have to counter the stresses and pressures brought to bear by international institutions such as those identified in this debate here today. Under normal circumstances, we're a small economy, we're a constrained economy, we're rather limited. We have limited investment avenues available to us, and therefore, in that normal constrained circumstance, it is difficult to take a stand effectively against those pressures that come from institutions. It becomes an even worse scenario for us, a worse reality for us, Mr. Deputy Speaker, when we happen to be faced with an economic circumstance which is the worst ever that we have faced. So normally, if things were good in Barbados, because our economy is still or would still be constrained, we have those issues to deal with as challenges. It becomes, I am saying, a more compounded situation because it is happening at a time when the economy of Barbados is not only on the back foot, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is standing on no legs whatsoever. So that's the reality which we face. We still have to ensure that those who come to bless us with their investment presence are such that their practices don't further cause issues for us. So yes, individuals engage in criminal behavior, but so do companies, and we have to brace ourselves and put into place the necessary frameworks to deal with that. They hide the identities of directorships, ownership, and we're dealing in part today with the business of beneficial ownership and beneficial ownership interests and stuff like that. These companies hide the identities to cover corruption. They hide the identities to facilitate tax evasion. These are two big realities, two big dynamics operating in the international economic space today. Tax evasion is a massive issue, as the honourable member for St. James Central rightly intimated, in these big industrial countries in the United States. And therefore, if people feel that by sheltering themselves in jurisdictions such as ours, they can evade taxes and practice their perverse and corrupt behaviors, then that is a reality against which we must stand. Developing countries, Mr. Deputy Speaker, lose trillions of dollars every year, trillions of dollars every year because of corruption. In the Barbados economy, because of the way it is structured, we are already losing millions of dollars because of the way some of our legitimate structures are set up. If you make reference to tourism and to tax policy, you will understand what we're talking about. A lot of the dollars which we would normally perhaps in other circumstances generate from tourism revenues because of investment of overseas companies in tourism infrastructure in Barbados, those dollars either don't reach us or they leave us. The honourable member for West St. Michael, West Central, my eternal friend, I am sure would be one of those who would be the first to admit of that. That is a known thing in Barbados. The Minister of Tourism, I am sure, would admit to that. The way things are right now, there's little that can be done about that. But all I'm saying is, through legitimate systems, we are already losing a lot of dollars, millions of dollars. Mr. Speaker, the potential for illegitimate systems or institutions or practices to further erode our potential revenue base is a reality with which we have to deal, because we can ill afford to lose that volume of revenue in Barbados. Our revenue generation capacity, our capital formation capacity is not so elastic that we could afford to allow additional loss through illegitimate institutional and endeavors on top of what is being lost through legitimate enterprise properly structured. There are some advantages to be served, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It is a known reality in Barbados that we have issues with directorships in Barbados, with ownership structures across companies, and persons who hold multiple or who hold positions in multiple companies in Barbados, creating conflicts of interest. And that is something that we need to try and avoid to the extent that the legislation makes it possible. Conflict of interest. Now, much has been said today about the fact that political personalities, personages seem to be prominently so the target of much of what the proposed legislation and the institutional stipulations seem designed to address. People in the practice of politics and government, people who give their lives to parliamentary service, a representation of the people, a representation of the governments and national interests at home and abroad seem to become principal targets of these things. The conflict of interest goes beyond the involvement of such persons in private enterprise. It strikes at the heart of what happens in the cultural practices obtaining around corporate life. And they are known to us here in Barbados. That conflict of interest exists in many situations because of the prominence of people across the top levels of ownership and the positions of directors of companies in Barbados. So that is definitely an advantage, can be served to the extent that we can reduce or avoid conflict of interest. We already struggle with revenue collection. That is a struggle for Barbados, and the government has been trying one or two initiatives to address the business of revenue collection in Barbados, and that must be done. Sometimes the net has to be made a bit broader. Sometimes the stipulations have to be made a bit more direct so that people who fall outside of the tax net, the revenue drag net, can then be caught in that. So these matters, though we do not like the fact that much of it is imposed from abroad and our subjection to those institutional stipulates, the truth of the matter is there are realities at home on the ground which are importantly also being addressed when we put measures such as these in place. We look to enhance, we look to improve our economy through enhanced investment. This government will perhaps, I believe this government already understands that we will only get out of this mess when we push beyond matters of taxation, when we push beyond measures of expenditure cuts, especially with reference to jobs, and push to the matter of growth, and understand that real and meaningful and soon and durable investment has to obtain if Barbados is to lift its head above the troubled waters beneath which we have sunk today. And investment is extremely important. Now, what the international world will tell you is that you lose part of your investment appeal or attractiveness when you allow yourselves to be caught up in some of the bad tax practices, allow yourself to be caught up in some of the bad corporate practices that obtain right now, and so you have to correct that. So I'm saying, though we do these things because we're called upon by the international community to do these things, and we are part of that international community, there are some benefits which definitely are served at home. We want to make Barbados a place which is attractive for investment. Of course, there's some people who believe if you don't clean up your act, you become more attractive as a potential investment jurisdiction. But we want to be seen more so by those who practice good corporate behavior as to be the place where they want to invest their resources so that our economy can be brought to life again. We want that confidence, and this is a note which has been sounded repeatedly by the government. We want to see confidence restored in the Barbados economy, and part of the restoration of that confidence derives from the fact that you've got a corporate culture such that people will feel more comfortable investing there because of legitimate considerations rather than illegitimate considerations. We need to reduce financial risk to people who invest in companies, their hard life's earnings in companies. Barbados is not immune from. Barbados is quite familiar with situations where you've invested your money in companies only to find that the outcome falls far short of the expectation. That has happened with private companies. It has now happened with government, because government finds itself in a position today where it cannot meet its debt obligations to persons from abroad and persons locally who have invested in government instruments. And the unfortunate reality is that faced with painful restructuring and reordering of debt, people will lose much of what they had worked hard to earn. Not only people, companies as well. Now that is part of the real story to be told in Barbados today. We can't avoid it as a reality. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, that being the case, you want to know that in as far as is practicable, you reduce the risk attaching, the financial risk attaching to people's investment in the corporate entities that operate in Barbados. We have, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I think importantly also to ensure that we preserve the integrity of the government system, of the system of government, perhaps I should better say. Government has to have a relationship with the corporate sector. Government procures services from the corporate sector. On various levels, government must interact and engage with and relate to the corporate sector. Government will want to be assured that it is, to the extent that that assurance is possible, it would want to be assured that it is engaging with corporate entities which bring a measure of integrity to the table, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It is not unknown that governments of this region, farther afield, and one would suggest even here in Barbados, have gotten involved with companies who, after a while, it would have been found, did not bring the requisite measure of integrity to the table. That imperils the integrity of the system of government. And so it's in government's own interest to make sure that the corporate world is as clean as is practically possible, so that when we engage with that world, for whatever reason we engage the corporate world, the system of government retains its integrity. I think one of the things that I have heard perhaps subliminally communicated over the past year is that if you look back at the last 10 years, you see that there's a question of that where the system of government falls to question because the corporate entities which had been engaged or with which that government had to deal did not bring the requisite measure of integrity to the table. Procurement is a big, massive issue in Barbados, and I'm sure that one day soon we will come as a parliament to tackle that specifically and debate here. But that's a massive issue, whether you are procuring services or otherwise entering into contracts with corporate entities. Government needs to appear to be sanitized, and therefore the entities with which it must deal have to have that feature attaching to their existence and practices as well. Mr. Speaker, access to information, knowledge of beneficial ownership interests, and all of these things are critical. The extent to which it should obtain in Barbados, I guess, is something which can be debated, and the Honorable Attorney General came upon this point. But this I want to say, Mr. Speaker, though we need to know who is operating at the top of the corporate world in Barbados, though we need to know where ownership is, though we need to know the factual information revolving around beneficial ownership and stuff like that, to the extent that is appropriate and practicable, though we need to know this, I want to suggest this. We live in a very small community, Barbados, and breach of privacy. Breach of privacy. A person has a right to privacy, even in a context where that person is expected to divulge publicly, quote unquote, certain information. Mr. Speaker, Ms. Deputy, you're following me. You may be required to divulge in a public context, and public is in quotation marks. It's public to some extent. It's not necessarily universally known, but the context in which you're supposed to divulge this is a public context. I make reference in a limited way to what the honorable member for Christchurch, Central, suggested, that right now the cabinet, all ministers, have declared to some extent some assets which is kept in some particular context. It's very limited. It's public because it's gone beyond you. It's gone beyond you and it's put out there. And I'm therefore defining public in a limited context. It's not open to every eye in Barbados, but certainly it is open to the eyes of somebody, some commission, some committee, some group somewhere. And the point I'm trying to make, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that there should be serious penalties attaching to those who would divulge in a more public way, that information. Because I don't think the intention can be of this government or any government in seeking to have integrity and good practices. I don't think the intention can be. And although access to information is crucial, I don't think the intention can be that everybody, everywhere, has to know everything about you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, because you serve in a public space or you happen to be one of the beneficial owners in some corporate entity. I'm sure there's some circumscription, some limitation as to where that access should, as to how far that access should go. All I'm simply saying that those who breach the limits and carry that information outside of those prescribed parameters should severely be dealt with. And that is the point I'm making. I think that is something that has to be addressed. I will not seek further to detain you. We are a part of the international community, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We want to know that we are complying with international respectability norms. We want to know that the image of Barbados is not sullied in the international world. We want to know that when people hear of governance and governments in Barbados, that these are entities around which they understand that there's a measure of integrity and pride, and these are institutions in which they can have confidence. And I understand, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that since we are part of that communal sphere, we must comply. And therefore, the degree to which we're willing to surrender our sovereignty in order to further our best interests, I think that's the place where we ought to aspire to be. There's a balance in that, Mr. Speaker. At the end of the day, we're still a sovereign state and must make our sovereign way in this world. I thank you.
Your brief. Member for St. Joseph.
Mr. Speaker, I like the Leader of the Opposition, I wouldn't wish to detain the chamber any further. There are things that we all have to grapple with as we seek to govern Barbados. Some of those things will be things like roads and lights and benches in schools and so on. Day-to-day things that will affect the lives of people. Others of these things are going to be a little bit more esoteric, but they affect the lives of people nonetheless. I appreciate the support of the chamber. I appreciate the frankness with which the chamber has spoken on these issues, because as I said in my opening foray, it can be a bit galling that as an independent sovereign state, we are still being called upon at times to contort our juridical positions so as to accommodate interests that we neither share nor settle. but such is the environment that we live in. I do maintain, however, that notwithstanding that we have some misgivings about having to make alterations to the way in which we do things at the behest of supranational bodies, there are still some advantages to be gained in this limited context. There are other pieces of legislation. When Nexus Chamber meets, we'll be asked to consider those separately from now, and I believe that many of the comments that we've made today will be relevant. But even though they will have been made today, they will still bear repeating, sir. It is a brave new world in some respects, but it is also a perilous new world. At all times, though, Barbadians must be assured that this administration takes our sovereignty seriously. We take it seriously. We came to government and found ourselves with a boot of debt resting on our necks in such a way that our economy and our livelihoods would have been crushed. But in an exercise of sovereignty, sir, we sought to remove that boot and to put Barbados on a solid footing for growth. Part of the process of putting Barbados on a solid path for growth, though, requires also that we address those other issues, such as the ones that we've addressed today. It is all part of governing. Governing never gave us the assurance that the decisions would be easy, or that sometimes the positions that we take would be convenient. But I assure Barbadians at all times that we take them from the purest of motives and in the proper interests of our country. With those words, sir, I'm obliged to you, and I now ask that you leave the chair. I already moved that it be read a second time, you know. I did that already. Therefore, I'm now asking the
question
I stand corrected.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. All our members have to say aye. Aye. Those against, say no. I think the ayes have it.
I beg to move that you do now leave the chair and that the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of the bill.
Question is that I do now leave the chair and this House resolve itself in committee for further consideration of this bill. All members in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it.
This House is now in committee.
Madam Chairman of Committees, I beg to move that Clause 1 stand part.
Question is that Clause 1 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Beg to move that Clause 2 stand part.
Question is that Clause 2 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 3.
Beg to move that Clause 3 stand part.
Question is that Clause 3 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 4.
I beg to move that Clause 4 stand part.
Question is that Clause 4 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 5.
I beg to move that Clause 5 stand part.
Question is that Clause 5 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 6.
Beg to move that Clause 6 stand part.
Question is that Clause 6 stand par. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Report.
I beg to move that you do now report to His Honour the Deputy Speaker the passing of one bill in committee.
Question is that I do not report to the Honourable Deputy Speaker the passing of one bill in committee. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Yes. Don't be behind it. I know you.
Chairman of committees have reported the passing of one bill in committee.
Move that this bill be read a third time.
I second that.
Question is that the bill be read a third time. All members in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it.
I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Companies Amendment Act of 2019.
Second.
I second that.
The question is that this bill be read and be so cited. All members in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited.
Order number 8, sir. Order number
Chairman, I beg to
8.
move that.
Order number 8, in the name of the Honourable Attorney General, to move second reading of the Charities Amendment Bill 2019.
Beg to move that the Charities Amendment Act of 2019 be read a second time.
Question is that this bill be read a second time. All members in favour say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it.
Beg to move that you do now
Leave the chair.
leave the chair and the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this.
Question is that I do now leave the chair and this House resolve itself in committee for the further consideration of this bill. All members in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it.
This House is now in committee.
Beg to move that Clause 1 stand part.
Question is that Clause 1 stand par. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Beg to move that Clause 2 stand part.
Question is that Clause 2 stand par. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 3.
Beg to move that Clause 3 stand part.
I second that.
Question is that Clause 3 stand par. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 4.
I beg to move that Clause 4 stand part.
I second that.
Question is that Clause 4 stand par. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 5.
I beg to move that Clause 5 stand part.
I second that.
Question is that Clause 5 stand par. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 6.
Clause 6.
Yes, sir.
Charities. I mean the schedule.
Sorry.
The schedule.
Schedule.
I beg to move that the schedule be the second schedule to the bill.
I second that.
Question is that the schedule be the second schedule to the bill. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Report.
Beg to move that you do now report to His Honour the Deputy Speaker the passing of one bill in committee.
Question is that I do not report to His Honour the Deputy Speaker the passing of one bill in committee. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman of committees has reported the passing of one bill in committee.
I beg to move that this bill
Read a third time.
be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. All members in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it.
I beg to move that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Charities Amendment Act of 2019.
Thank you. The question is that this bill be so cited. This bill is now passed and so cited.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of this sitting for lunch until 2:15 p.m.
Question is that this house is now suspended until 2:15 today. All members in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. This house is now suspended until 2:15 today.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that the minutes of the meeting held on Wednesday, 20th of March 2019 be confirmed, and that the minutes of the meetings held on Monday, 18th February 2019 and Tuesday, 2nd April 2019 be deferred.
Wish. Question is that those minutes so mentioned be read and confirmed, and the second one be deferred. All members in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those against say no. I think the ayes have it.
Government business resumed, sir.
Government business.
Order number 12 on the supplementary order paper, in the name of the Honorable Attorney General, to move the passing of a resolution to approve the Proceeds of Crime Amendment Order 2019 made by the Attorney General under Section 65(1), the Proceeds of Crime Act, Cap 143, and that Her Excellency Governor General be asked to assent and to take the necessary steps to give effect to the resolution.
Member for St. Joseph.
Mr. Speaker, we are here on this particular item of government business to put right what is in essence an omission or perhaps even an error on the part of the last administration, but one that simply has to be addressed for so long as this administration continues our fervent efforts to bring the matter of corruption to the ground. Now, Mr. Speaker, to tell you exactly what is here requires a little bit of recounting of history. Mr. Speaker, our only legislation dealing with corruption and making criminal offenses of acts of corruption is our 1929 Anti-Prevention of Corruption Act. Let me say at the outset, sir, that Cabinet will shortly be moved to agree to the drafting of a new piece of legislation dealing with corruption in Barbados. Mr. Speaker, this administration has put many instruments in place over the last 10 months. We've laid and completed the Working Select Committee of an Integrity and Public Life Bill, which is in part intended to root out corruption among individuals in private life. We have also passed a Proceeds of Crime Bill, which is targeted towards removing the profit motive out of criminal conduct. And today, sir, we are seeking to make sensible arrangements in relation to the further prosecution of corruption acts. Now, what does all that mean? Mr. Speaker, our current Proceeds of Crime Act includes a very important investigative tool in the hands of the authorities in Barbados. Under that act, and specifically under Section 42, the authorities are entitled to seek an order from the court for production of information and documents from any authority or individual who may have such things in their possession, so long as an individual is suspected of having committed a particular kind of criminal offense. But our difficulty, sir, is that we have not effectively, the last parliament, the last administration, did not include corruption as being one of those offenses. Now, I don't want to suggest, sir, that the last administration did anything wrong, but I will say that what they did was done poorly. Mr. Speaker, in order to procure documents through a court order, the person must either have committed or have been suspected of committing a particular list, one offense in a particular list of offenses in the schedule. The schedule to the Proceeds of Crime Act, sir, was limited, Mr. Speaker, to specific offenses therein listed. And what we are seeking to do, though, is to extend the number of offenses.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that the sitting be suspended for 10 minutes.
My question is that this House be suspended for 10 minutes.
Okay.
All members in favor say aye. Those against say no. Things the ayes have it. House is now suspended for 10 minutes today.
Okay.
When suspension was taken, we are order number 12, and we revert to that order. Member for St. Joseph.
Yes, sir. As I was saying, Mr. Speaker, so the Proceeds of Crime Act had a very limited schedule. It related, in fact, to drug offenses. But in 2011, the last administration passed a new statute dealing with money laundering. In fact, sir, that statute is called the Money Laundering and Financing of Terrorism Prevention and Control Act. And that act amended the Proceeds of Crime schedule and did a curious thing, sir. It added a number of offenses, but it included also offenses under sections 10, 12, 13, 15, 17, 18, 20, 21, 29, 30, and 32 to 40, 48, 60, and 64 of the Prevention of Corruption Act 2011. Now, the only problem is, sir, that the Prevention of Corruption Act 2011 was not in force as at the date when the money laundering statute was passed. Nor did it become law in 2012, nor did it become law in 2013, nor 14, sir, nor 15, 16, 17, nor 18, and it is still not the law. So while it might have been that the last administration sought to extend the schedule of offenses which would allow the authorities to go after documents like banking documents and corporate documents and so on for the purposes of establishing particular offenses, because the statute that is stipulated never came into force, then we have a problem. That Prevention of Corruption Act, Mr. Speaker, would have created a number of new offenses dealing with corruption. As the law stands today, therefore, if the government wants to go after an institution, a financial institution, to look at movement of money in respect of an individual who is suspected of having committed a corruption offense, it cannot do so. Now, sir, it is a relatively simple fix, because under the Proceeds of Crime Act, the Attorney General can, by order, which is itself subject to an affirmative resolution of Parliament, amend the statute, amend the schedule so as to add appropriate offenses. Recognizing, sir, that we do not now have in our arsenal of investigative tools, sir, and I promise the people in Barbados that the investigations are continuing. The investigations are continuing. But because we do not have the ability to go to banks or other institutions pursuant to a court order and say, provide us with documentation in relation to this suspect, we have hit a brick wall. So that, Mr. Speaker, we are here today to amend the schedule to the Proceeds of Crime Act and insert in that schedule sections 3 and 5 of our existing 1929 Prevention of Corruption Act. No, sir, I am not happy that I am dealing with a 1929 piece of legislation. I have never been, and I do not intend that that should continue indefinitely. In fact, sir, I fully expect to be able to bring to this chamber within the very near future, and by near future, I would like to think that the capacity of my Chief Parliamentary Counsel's office will be such that we can bring it within the next 3 months. But Barbados desperately needs to have a new piece of legislation dealing with prevention of corruption. There's no doubt about it, sir. It is an embarrassment that in the year 2019, we could be dealing with a piece of legislation which provides that the maximum fine for corrupt acts could be $2,500. That would have been a huge amount of money in 1929, but it is not a huge amount of money today. In fact, it is trifling today, sir. Trifling. And for those who would want to say that it would be an easy thing just to come and change the fines, while that is something that a person could argue, the fact remains that it is still an archaic piece of legislation, and you only have to read it to be able to tell. Any person looking at a statute that is now 90 years old would have to immediately believe that they were reading something almost like Chaucer or Shakespeare. The language is different, the syntax is different. The absence of punctuation in places that we would normally put punctuation is glaring. And while that might have suited, sir, 90 years ago, it does not suit Barbados of today. So for me as Attorney General to come to Parliament and just say, I want to increase the fines on that old bill, on that old piece of legislation, to $250,000 does not get me where I need to be. It doesn't. So rather than tinker with a 90-year-old statute, it is better, sir, for me to present to this chamber a new piece of legislation. Think about this, sir. The existing Prevention of Corruption Act has about 9 sections. 9 sections. The sections which the last administration sought to provide as scheduled offenses number more than 9. In other words, had they brought their Prevention of Corruption Act into force, there would have been a total of about 12 offenses that would have applied. Under the existing Prevention of Corruption Bill 1929, only Section 3 and Section 5 are offense-creating sections. So there's no point trying to tinker with that. It is old, it is outdated, and we need to have a new statute on our books. I know somebody will say, well, how come you ain't do it already? Well, sir, it has only been less than a year. If we enact it now, or whenever it's enacted, it will only relate to the future. And secondly, in the last 10 months, this chamber has been moved to make legislative changes of, in some instances, groundbreaking kinds, so as to bring many of our laws into the modern era. I don't want anybody to say that I'm a hard-working Attorney General, say that the staff of the Chief Parliamentary Counsel's office are hard-working legal officers. And day after day after day, I have to go after them to tell them I need this particular bill urgently. I need that bill urgently. They're working on the product of the Select Committee, that is the Integrity and Public Life Bill. They were working earnestly on new planning legislation that was only conceived in the minds of an opposition but never made it to their hands until a lot of work had been done since we came to office. New legislation dealing with public finance. They're being asked to do whistleblower legislation. They're being asked to do a whole raft of other pieces of legislation, and the office is seriously inundated with work. Now, sir, for any administration, we have to prioritize. And the first priorities of this administration have always been doing those mission-critical things that would help to right the ship of state. And we've been doing those effectively. And we're now into another level of legislation, sir. We're looking to set up an anti-corruption agency. And that anti-corruption agency, Mr. Speaker, will require its own talking too much of late, sir, will require its own pieces of legislation because we've never had anything like that in Barbados before. So that new agency, and we will talk about that in due course, is being married in many respects to our new legislation which will deal with corruption. So we will have a new statute dealing with prevention of corruption, and it will go hand in hand with a new agency which will be there for the purpose of ferreting out, policing and prosecuting corrupt acts in Barbados. So there's method in our madness. But in the meantime, sir, we have to empower the office of the DPP with the ability to go to the banks and say, we need financial information on John Brown. He is a person suspected of having committed... I'm still waiting on the doctor to come and attend to it. I get help from the lawyers, the butchers, the candlestick makers, everybody else. But even the Minister of Health, who wouldn't know a piece of plaster from Scotch tape, and the doctor watching me choke. I'm willing to pay for the attention, sir. But the point is that it caused me to lose my train of thought. But, sir, so we are bringing in new instruments, but in the meantime, I need the office of the DPP needs to be able to approach our financial institutions and say, we want information on this particular individual because he or she is suspected of having committed acts of corruption. Now, Mr. Speaker, this is not so new a power in the hands of the DPP, because the DPP is able to go after a whole set of individuals who have either committed or are suspected of having committed offenses under numerous pieces of legislation. So let me tell you. The list of scheduled offenses, sir, include offenses under the Wild Birds Protection Act, under the Money Laundering and Financing of Terrorism Act, under the Transnational Organized Crime Act, and others. So already in our law, the DPP is able to approach the court and say to the court, Your Honor, here is evidence which supports a suspicion that John Brown has been committing criminal offenses of a particular kind. All that we are doing now, sir, is adding to that list of offenses. Mr. Speaker, there is no Bajan who would look me straight in the eye and say to me that in their view, corruption is not a serious problem. I don't think there's any Bajan who would say that, sir. In fact, as an administration coming into office, we campaigned on pillars of non-corruption, but also made a solemn commitment to the people of this country that we would ferret it out and prosecute it where possible. So I don't want the public to feel that we are engaging in a witch hunt. The process has been on our law. in our law books since the Proceeds of Crime Act was first passed. And I will tell you what year that was, sir. Proceeds of Crime Act was first passed in 1990. 1990. So, sir, for the last 29 years, under the laws of Barbados, the Director of Public Prosecution has had this power. And, sir, it is to my certain knowledge that it is a power that has been exercised in the past and not infrequently. Not infrequently, sir. But you know what? Somehow or another, there were blinkers on when it came to corrupt activity. They could do it if they suspected you of having committed acts under the drug prevention legislation. So if you were a drug runner or a drug lord, they could seek an order of the court against you. They could seek an order of the court against a whole set of other individuals. But somehow or another, sir, it was not felt that corrupt acts would be included. But in 1990, sir, Barbados had a reputation for being a clean jurisdiction. In 1990, Mr. Speaker, Barbados was not known as a place that was corrupt. We used to talk about Antigua and all those other places in the Caribbean and have a good laugh, because Barbados was not so. We did not know a country that admitted of that kind of activity. But we know now, sir. We know now. And when I tell you that we are committed to rooting it out, people need to look and see what is being done on a daily basis in this Parliament. Step by step by step. Step by step by step, sir. We are putting legislative measures in place to allow us to get where we have to go. Mr. Speaker, I don't know that I need to say anything more about this. I have committed to bringing new legislation to deal with prevention of corruption. But there can be no good reason, when you consider the nature of corrupt acts in this country and the kinds of the amounts of money that we hear have been paid to people under the table, there's no good reason, sir, why corrupt acts should be ring-fenced. And the DPP should not be able to look into these matters in the same way that she, the incumbent is a woman, can look into other criminal acts, sir. I ask the Chamber, therefore, to support the making of this order. I think that it will help to take us where we need to be. One final word, sir. I am asking the court, I'm asking the Chamber, which is a court, the highest court in the land, so I'm not wrong. I'm asking the Chamber to act under a piece of legislation that is itself 29 years old. I believe that the public, certainly members of this chamber, would recollect that in recent weeks we have passed a Proceeds and Instrumentalities of Crime Act. That act, however, even though it has been gazetted, is to come into force by proclamation. So that act has not yet come into force. The date of the proclamation now has to be determined by the Cabinet of Barbados. I expect that date to be very soon, perhaps within weeks, while whatever administrative arrangements need to be put in place are put in place. And so in the meantime, sir, we are looking to the powers under the existing Proceeds of Crime Act so as to be able to facilitate the work that the DPP has to do, sir. With those few words, I ask the Chamber to support this order, as it will help us to get where we need to be in cleaning up Barbados and restoring our name and reputation to the place that it used to hold in the 1990s when the very Proceeds of Crime Act was passed. In those days, sir, Barbados was seen as a clean and corruption-free jurisdiction. There were no hidden costs to doing business, a place very much different to what has been existing over the last decades. I'm obliged to you.
For St. Joseph.
I beg to move that this resolution,
Bill.
resolution, which has been laid before this chamber, be passed and cited.
Just
no
pass.
need for citing, just pass, sir.
Question is that this resolution will not pass. All those in favor say aye. Those against say no. Meeting ayes have it.
With that, I'm wearing all kind of hats today, sir. With that, we've come to the end of government business for today. And we're not going to meet next week. I think that parliamentarians need a short break. Unfortunately, it won't be an Easter break. No such luck. We still have a lot of business to do. So we will not meet next week, but we will therefore adjourn until Tuesday the 23rd of April until 10 in the morning, sir.
Question is that this House be now adjourned until Tuesday the 23rd of April at 10 o'clock in the morning. All the members in favor say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. This House is now adjourned until Tuesday the 23rd of April at 10 o'clock in the morning. Thank you.